if I believe that every New Yorker should be able to live a dignified life and that it's city government's job to ensure that, New Yorkers will agree with me when I bring up the example of public education.
Free education, free health care. What else?
I mean, anything that's necessary.
On January 1st, 2026, New York City handed its highest office to a 34-year-old man born outside the United States, a Muslim, someone without corporate backers and without roots in the financial elite. That man was Zohran Kwame Mamdani, the 112th mayor of the largest city in America. His victory on November 4th, 2025, was not a political fluke. It was the result of years spent organizing at the grassroots level, fighting housing injustice, and rejecting a system of power built on money and insider connections. Mamdani became the youngest mayor in more than a century, and the first Muslim, the first South Asian, and the first Africa-born person to hold the office. Backed by figures such as Alexandria, Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders, Mamdani represents a generation that treats politics as a tool for direct intervention in everyday life. Rent, buses, food, and basic dignity at work. Family background and early childhood. Zohran Kwame Mamdani was born on October 18, 1991, in Kampala, Uganda. He is the only child of Mahmoud Mamdani, a leading post-colonial theorist and professor at Columbia University, and Mira Nair, an internationally acclaimed filmmaker best known for works such as Queen of Katwe. From birth, Mamdani was immersed in a household where politics, art, and culture were not separate domains, but parts of a single moral framework. In this family environment, stories were never treated as neutral. His father's academic work focused on colonial power, violence, and identity in Africa and South Asia. His mother's films centered on marginalized lives and social hierarchies. Together, they conveyed a consistent lesson: power shapes narrative, and resistance can take intellectual, artistic, or collective form. This upbringing did not train Mamdani for politics in a technical sense, but it trained him to question authority and examine who benefits from existing systems. Mamdani's early childhood in Uganda unfolded against the backdrop of post-colonial history. Both of his parents were of Indian descent, part of a diaspora shaped by British imperial rule in East Africa, although he was too young to consciously analyze these forces. Questions of belonging, displacement, and identity were present from the beginning. Uganda was home, but it was also a reminder that citizenship and security were often contingent rather than guaranteed. At the age of 5, Mamdani moved with his parents to Cape Town, South Africa. The country was navigating the early years of the post-apartheid era. Inequality remained visible in housing, education, and public space. For Mamdani, this move reinforced an early understanding that legal equality did not erase structural divides. 2 years later, at age 7, the family relocated again, this time to New York City. Growing up in New York, Mamdani lived between the Upper West Side, a relatively stable, middle-class neighborhood, and the Bronx, a borough shaped by racial diversity and concentrated poverty. Daily movement between these spaces exposed him to stark contrasts in public services, policing, schools, and housing conditions. These experiences formed a practical education in inequality long before formal political engagement. Mamdani became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 2018. The delay between his arrival as a child and his legal citizenship reinforced his belief that borders and paperwork can determine life outcomes. This belief later became central to his political worldview. By the time he entered public life, issues of migration, housing, and structural injustice were not abstract positions. They were extensions of his own lived history. Education. Zohran Kwame Mamdani's formal education began in New York City's public school system and took a decisive turn when he was admitted to Bronx High School of Science. Bronx Science is known for its rigorous academics, competitive culture, and emphasis on measurable performance. Students are trained to manage heavy workloads, meet strict deadlines, and defend their conclusions with evidence. For Mamdani, the school did not shape him into a scientist, but it instilled habits of discipline, preparation, and persistence. The competitive environment also exposed limits within merit-based systems. Admission depended on a single standardized exam. Daily success depended on access to time, tutoring, and stability outside school. Mamdani observed that talent alone did not explain outcomes. Structural advantages mattered. This realization reinforced lessons he had already absorbed from life in New York's uneven neighborhoods. Education, he concluded early on, could reproduce inequality as easily as it could challenge it. In 2010, Mamdani enrolled at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. He graduated in 2014 with a bachelor's degree in Africana Studies. The field examined colonial rule, racial capitalism, and global systems of power. His coursework focused on how empires extract value, how borders are enforced, and how inequality is maintained through law and economics. These were not abstract theories for Mamdani. They aligned directly with his family history and personal experience of migration. At Bowdoin, Mamdani did not treat education as preparation for elite careers. He treated it as a framework for action. He learned to identify patterns across continents and decades. He learned to connect housing policy in New York to global histories of land seizure and labor control. The program sharpened his ability to explain injustice in plain terms and to link individual hardship to political decisions. Outside the classroom, Mamdani became politically active. He co-founded a campus chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. The group organized teach-ins, protests, and public discussions focused on occupation, human rights, and international law. Participation placed Mamdani in direct conflict with administrators and donors who preferred political quiet. The experience taught him how institutions respond when challenged and how pressure campaigns are built over time. The long-term impact of Mamdani's education was clear. He did not pursue finance, consulting, or law. He moved toward housing advocacy, organizing, and public service. His schooling did not aim at wealth accumulation. It aimed at understanding power and intervening where harm was most visible. That orientation would define every stage of his career that followed. Early career. After graduating from college in 2014, Zohran Kwame Mamdani did not enter a professional track associated with prestige or financial security. His first full-time work was as a housing counselor in Queens. In this role, he assisted tenants facing eviction, foreclosure, and unsafe living conditions. Most of the families he worked with were immigrants, people of color, or low-wage workers with limited legal protection. The work was procedural and immediate. Mamdani helped clients fill out forms, navigate housing courts, and communicate with landlords. He attended hearings where a missed deadline or an unread notice could determine whether a family kept their home. Through this daily exposure, he saw how housing law operated less as a neutral system and more as a filter that rewarded property owners and penalized tenants without legal knowledge or resources. These experiences confirmed his belief that inequality was enforced through routine administrative processes rather than exceptional abuse. During the same period, Mamdani pursued music as a parallel practice. Under the stage names Young Cardamom and Mr. Cardamom, he wrote and produced hip-hop music that combined political commentary with personal narrative. His lyrics addressed policing, displacement, racism, and diaspora identity. The music was not a commercial pursuit. It functioned as an extension of his political thinking. Using rhythm and language to communicate ideas that formal policy discussions often excluded, Mamdani contributed music to the soundtrack of Queen of Katwe. Directed by his mother, the project reinforced his understanding of art as labor and as political expression. Music, like film or scholarship, could document injustice and challenge dominant narratives. It was not a retreat from public life, but another method of engagement. The connection between Mamdani's housing work and his music was direct. His days were spent confronting eviction notices and legal deadlines. His nights were spent translating those pressures into sound and verse. Both practices demanded attention to lived experience and concrete harm. Both rejected abstraction. This period shaped Mamdani's approach to politics. He learned to speak with people facing immediate crisis. He learned how systems appear from the ground level. He also learned how culture can mobilize attention where policy language fails. By the time he began organizing campaigns, he was already trained in two complementary disciplines: navigating institutional power and communicating resistance. Together, they prepared him for a transition from advocacy to elected office, entry into politics and early campaigns. Zohran Kwame Mamdani's entry into formal politics began in 2015, not as a candidate, but as a volunteer. He worked on a New York City Council campaign, performing the most basic tasks of electoral organizing. He knocked on doors, made phone calls, distributed flyers, and spoke with residents in apartment buildings and on sidewalks. The work was repetitive and unpaid. It taught him how political power is built from the ground up. Through this experience, Mamdani learned that campaigns are less about speeches and more about logistics. Turnout depended on trust. Trust depended on presence. Presence required time, patience, and consistency. He observed how candidates with financial backing could purchase visibility, while grassroots campaigns relied on volunteer labor. This imbalance shaped his skepticism toward money-driven politics. Mamdani soon became involved with the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. Within the organization, he took on roles as a field organizer and campaign manager. His work focused on building volunteer teams, coordinating canvassing operations, and maintaining message discipline. These campaigns often faced defeat. They lacked funding. They were dismissed by party insiders. Volunteers struggled to pay rent while working long hours. Financial instability was a constant. Mamdani lived with uncertainty while organizing for candidates who were unlikely to win. He encountered skepticism from political professionals who viewed democratic socialism as unrealistic or unelectable, rather than weakening his commitment. These conditions hardened it. He concluded that waiting for institutional permission to enact change was not an option. Power had to be contested directly. By late 2019, Mamdani decided to run for office himself. He entered the race for the New York State Assembly, representing District 36, which includes Astoria, Ditmars Steinway, and Astoria Heights in Queens. The district was diverse, with large immigrant populations and rising housing costs. Mamdani centered his campaign on housing justice, public transportation, and labor dignity. He spoke openly about rent burden, eviction risk, and transit affordability. The campaign rejected corporate donations entirely. Instead, it relied on small contributions and volunteer labor. Mamdani framed his own experiences as a housing counselor and organizer as qualifications, not obstacles. He ran on the claim that lived experience mattered as much as legislative expertise. In June 2020, Mamdani won the Democratic primary. He went on to win the general election later that year. His victory marked a shift in representation for the district. It demonstrated that a campaign without corporate funding could defeat an incumbent through sustained organizing and clear policy commitments. This first electoral success did not signal an end to struggle. It signaled proof of concept. Mamdani had translated grassroots organizing into electoral power. He had tested the belief that community networks could overcome financial disadvantage. That lesson would guide every stage of his political career thereafter. Career in the New York State Assembly. Zohran Kwame Mamdani entered the New York State Assembly in January 2021, representing District 36 in Queens. His approach in Albany differed from that of many first-term legislators. He did not focus on seniority building or quiet committee work. He focused on visible action tied directly to material outcomes. Mamdani was re-elected in 2022 and again in 2024, both times without a primary challenger. The uncontested races reflected consolidation of support within the district rather than disengagement. Constituents associated his office with responsiveness, public presence, and follow-through. His staff emphasized casework, tenant support, and language access for immigrants. Albany was treated as a site of leverage, not insulation. One of Mamdani's most visible initiatives was his leadership on free public transportation. He played a central role in launching a pilot program for free bus service in parts of New York City. The program targeted routes serving working-class neighborhoods with high transit dependence. Mamdani argued that fares functioned as a regressive tax. Removing them increased ridership, reduced enforcement encounters, and expanded access to work and education. The pilot provided data that challenged assumptions about cost and usage, strengthening the case for system-wide reform. On housing, Mamdani sponsored and supported legislation aimed at strengthening tenant protections, limiting rent increases, and expanding public investment in affordable housing. He aligned closely with labor unions and tenant associations rather than real estate interests. His legislative record reflected a consistent priority, shifting power away from property owners and toward renters and workers. Mamdani also became known for direct participation in protest, blurring the line between legislator and organizer. In 2021, he joined a hunger strike with New York City taxi drivers, many of whom faced crushing debt tied to medallion loans. Mamdani refused food alongside drivers for multiple days, demanding state intervention. The action drew media attention and increased pressure on regulators. The state later approved a debt relief framework for drivers. Mamdani described the strike as politics using the body, arguing that credibility required shared risk. Throughout his tenure, Mamdani maintained formal affiliation with the Democratic Socialists of America. He rejected the idea that socialism was symbolic or rhetorical. In his framing, it meant redistributing resources, expanding public goods, and weakening systems that produced precarity. His office regularly collaborated with immigrant advocacy groups, labor organizers, and housing coalitions. Mamdani's time in the assembly established a clear pattern. He used legislative tools, but he did not rely on them exclusively. He combined lawmaking with organizing, protest, and service delivery. This hybrid approach made him a visible figure beyond his district and positioned him as a leading voice within New York's progressive wing. By the end of his third term, Mamdani was no longer seen as a marginal legislator. He was seen as a test case for a different model of governance: mayoral campaign and inauguration. In 2024, Zohran Kwame Mamdani formally announced his candidacy for mayor of New York City. The announcement did not emphasize biography or symbolism. It centered on a short list of concrete policies. Mamdani proposed free citywide bus service, municipally operated grocery stores, universal childcare, and a freeze on rent-stabilized apartments. Each proposal addressed a specific cost faced by working-class residents. Each proposal assumed expanded public responsibility rather than private market correction. The campaign rejected corporate donations from the outset. Fundraising relied on small-dollar contributions and volunteer labor. Field operations focused on door-to-door canvassing in outer borough neighborhoods with low historical turnout. Messaging avoided abstraction. Volunteers spoke about rent bills, commute times, food prices, and childcare availability. Mamdani framed the race as a choice between administrative continuity and structural intervention. As the campaign gained momentum, Mamdani received public endorsements from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. The endorsements signaled alignment with the national progressive movement and helped mobilize younger voters. They also intensified opposition from party leadership and business groups, who questioned Mamdani's experience and fiscal assumptions. The Democratic primary in 2025 became the central test. Mamdani faced a crowded field that included former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Cuomo entered the race with high name recognition, established donor networks, and institutional support. Mamdani countered with field strength and message consistency. Turnout surged in districts with large immigrant populations and among voters under 40. On primary night, Mamdani defeated Cuomo, an outcome widely described as a political upset. Following the primary, Mamdani shifted to a general election strategy focused on coalition maintenance. He emphasized administrative competence alongside policy ambition. His platform remained unchanged. He argued that clarity built trust. On November 4, 2025, Mamdani won the general election, securing a citywide mandate without reversing positions or expanding donor access. Mamdani was sworn in on January 1, 2026, at Gracie Mansion. At 34 years old, he became the youngest mayor of New York City in more than a century, as well as the first Muslim, first South Asian, and first Africa-born individual to hold the office. The inauguration emphasized continuity of purpose rather than ceremony. Mamdani spoke briefly about responsibility, cost of living, and public trust. The transition from legislator to executive introduced new constraints. Mamdani assumed control over a municipal workforce exceeding 300,000 employees and an annual budget exceeding $100 billion. Decision-making shifted from advocacy to administration. However, his stated objective remained consistent. He framed the mayoralty as an extension of organizing, with City Hall serving as an instrument for redistributing power and resources. By the end of his first weeks in office, Mamdani had moved from representing a district to governing a city. The campaign that brought him there defined expectations. The office he inherited defined limits. The tension between those forces would shape his tenure as mayor, personal life, and values. Despite holding the highest office in New York City, Zohran Kwame Mamdani has maintained a deliberately modest lifestyle. He continues to live in Astoria, Queens, in the same rental apartment he has occupied since 2018. The apartment predates his election to the State Assembly and his rise to citywide office. Mamdani has not relocated to a private residence or luxury building. He has framed this choice as a matter of consistency rather than symbolism. His daily routines have changed little from his years as a low-income organizer and legislator. In early 2025, Mamdani married Rama Duwaji, an artist of Syrian origin whose work spans illustration, animation, and ceramics. The two met through a dating application. Their relationship developed outside political circles. Duwaji has remained professionally independent, continuing her artistic practice without public alignment to Mamdani's campaigns. The couple has no children. Both have described their current focus as professional stability rather than family expansion. Mamdani has kept his personal life largely private. His social media presence is limited and functional. Posts typically feature workplace settings, public meetings, or occasional photographs with his wife. He does not document leisure activities or personal milestones. This restraint reflects a broader boundary he maintains between public responsibility and private life. Outside official duties, Mamdani reads international news and political theory, with particular attention to global inequality, migration, and labor movements. He attends cultural events selectively, often prioritizing exhibitions, film screenings, and performances connected to immigrant or working-class communities. These activities align with his upbringing and professional interests, rather than serving as networking opportunities. As a Muslim public official, Mamdani has addressed religious identity directly, but without theatrics. He has resisted pressure to downplay or over-explain his faith. Instead, he treats it as one element of a broader ethical framework centered on dignity, restraint, and collective responsibility, in a political environment that often demands personal disclosure as reassurance. Mamdani's approach emphasizes conduct over confession. By the standards of modern urban politics, Zohran Kwame Mamdani entered City Hall with limited personal wealth. Public financial disclosures following his inauguration in 2026 listed his net worth at approximately $200,000, making him one of the least wealthy mayors in New York City's modern history. His income prior to becoming mayor came primarily from his salary as a New York State Assembly member, which stood at $142,000 per year. As mayor, his annual salary increased to approximately $260,000. Mamdani holds no corporate equity, business investments, or board positions. His most significant personal asset is a parcel of land in Uganda, purchased in 2014 with an estimated value between $150,000 and $250,000. He has reported no income derived from that property. The absence of diversified investments reflects a financial profile shaped more by wage income than asset accumulation. Mamdani has described this structure as intentional, citing a desire to avoid conflicts of interest and financial entanglement with private markets he regulates. Mamdani's approach to charitable activity emphasizes collective mobilization rather than personal giving. Through campaign-linked and community-based fundraising networks, he has helped raise an estimated $2.5 million for material relief efforts. These funds were directed toward food access, $600,000, housing stabilization, $1.2 million, and cost of living assistance, $700,000. The emphasis was not philanthropy as reputation building, but redistribution coordinated through grassroots organizations, current legacy, and future vision. Even in the early phase of his mayoralty, Zohran Kwame Mamdani has come to represent a broader political shift rather than a single administration. His election signaled that New York City voters were willing to place executive power in the hands of a leader defined by migration, faith, and organizing rather than wealth or institutional seniority. For many residents, particularly young voters and communities of color, Mamdani's rise validated political participation that had long been treated as symbolic rather than decisive. Substantively, Mamdani's legacy has begun to take shape around affordability. His administration has prioritized housing stability, public transportation access, and cost of living relief as central governance goals rather than secondary social programs. By framing rent, transit, and food as public responsibilities, he has shifted the terms of debate within City Hall. The emphasis has been on reducing financial pressure on working households rather than incentivizing private development through concessions. Mamdani's long-term vision centers on confronting systemic inequality rather than managing its outcomes. He has stated that policy must alter underlying power relations between landlords and tenants, employers and workers, and government and residents. This approach brings both opportunity and risk. Resistance from real estate interests, fiscal watchdogs, and state-level authorities remains a structural constraint. At the same time, expanded public engagement and coalition support offer leverage unavailable to prior administrations. Beyond New York, Mamdani's mayoralty carries national significance. He stands as a visible symbol for immigrants, Muslims, and the millennial generation within American politics. His career challenges assumptions about who can govern major cities and how authority is earned. Whether his tenure produces durable institutional change remains an open question. What is already clear is that his presence has altered expectations. For a growing segment of the electorate, Mamdani's leadership has made structural reform appear not only imaginable, but achievable.